brought sparks to my evening. What do you say, guys?
For me, like it was such a emotional roller coaster. I think like we were all so worried when whatever happened. I think we'll touch on it later, but after that, I think the race was like really good in my opinion.
Really? Actually, I had a lot of conflicting sort of uh, views on it. A lot of people said that this was the most boring Bahrain Grand Prix till date. Um,
But yeah, go on.
yeah, a lot of people said it was the most boring Grand Prix till date. Uh, what are your views on that? Because there wasn't much overtaking, just people, Red Bull being very cheap about their tires they got. I think Pirelli told them they wouldn't get a refund, so they used, I think, every single set of tires they had just to maximize their revenue usage. What do you think?
Yeah, I think like Red Bull, I think I feel like Red Bull never tried winning this race. Like they got P2 because of Bottas's bad luck, which now seems to be a constant. But past that, I think Red Bull never really pushed, like when Max said when he came out on the hards and he was like, guys, I'm just gonna go full send. I was really looking forward to it. I thought they might do a one stop and challenge Lewis's mediums, but then they pit before Lewis pit on his mediums, and that was the race.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, Harry, what are your views on qualifying? And um, I'm going to probably build on a point which Rusty spoke about. Um, just the fact that Bottas is bad luck, but can we still keep putting it down to bad luck because he was quite a way off in qualifying from Hamilton?
Yes, you're right. If I'm right, precisely, he was about 3 tenths of Hamilton's pace.
Yeah, and that was I think his closest lap from any of the qualifying sessions, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, you're right. The 3 tenths was the approximate gap between both Hamilton and Bottas on all three of their qualifying sessions. That's Q1, Q2, Q3. Well, I think it purely comes down to driver skill over there. I don't see any reason why Mercedes would give two different cars to Hamilton and Bottas, or it could also mean that Bottas is not as good as Hamilton to set up his car. But coming into that, I really felt Bottas just lacked the experience and the skill which Hamilton has. And if I'm right, during the session we would have noticed that what was happening is in the first sector, whoever pushed really hard, they would get a really good time, maybe beat Hamilton's fastest sector, or put a really good sector time. But coming to the final sector, they don't have the tires in the right temperature window. Or they've worn out or gone off that peak performance limit or range or whatever you call it, where it doesn't deliver in the final sector. So you lose out all that time which you gained in first sector. So I would say Hamilton just managed it right to get those 3 tenths, which is a huge gap over Bottas.
Yeah, and I think that touches upon something we spoke about last week or last podcast was the major difference between Bottas and Hamilton this year. Even though Bottas has probably been quicker in all of the practice sessions and qualifyings earlier, at least the practice sessions and build up to qualifying, but Hamilton has always gotten him on tire conservation and tire usage.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we all historically know that Hamilton is really good with the tires. Like how Vettel once commented that he really massages them to a limit where they just keep going without wearing out. So that's a given about Hamilton's one of Hamilton's plus points.
In bigger news than Grosjean's crash, we have Black Sheep with us finally. What's up, Black Sheep?
Hello. Sorry, my PC crashed, guys. Missed the start,
That's fine.
but I'm here now.
So did Bottas, but it's okay. We were talking about Bottas anyway.
Uh, yeah, some hard comments on Bottas over there, but well, he
What's life?
When
deserves.
I talk about Bottas's bad luck, I think on race days he's been having it. I think on quali, I think one lap pace he's no match to Lewis. I think I think including himself, deep down he knows that he's not at the same level of as Lewis is. But like I think at Mugello was it where he picked up Sebastian's end plate, where he was running P1, lost a bunch of downforce, and today he had two punchers. I'm not sure about the second one. He was lucky there was a safety car, but the first one, then again, like it's just such small margins. He was still having a terrible race up to that point where he had a piss poor start, but then like it's just not been going his way where it could have.
Yeah, but that's what great drivers do. I mean, they make luck because Hamilton is a very good driver. I'm not going to say he's the best on the grid right now. I'm not going to the driver comparisons are for another chat. But Hamilton is a very good driver because he performs. He doesn't leave as much to chance as another driver would.
Yep, I think everyone's going to agree on that.
Yeah. But talking about how volatile a sport and the margin of error in Formula One, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, especially for which is Grosjean. I'm not calling him fat. I'm just saying that he is the big topic today. Um, what do you guys think? I mean, I've been watching Formula One for 20 years now. I have never seen a car explode, a split and explode like that before. I've seen it crumple under force and all of that. I've just never seen it split like it did yesterday. But actually,
Yeah,
why don't we? I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Rusty, you had something to say?
No, no, go on after you.
Uh, yeah, I think Mara, you and I were having a bit of a chat whilst that was happening, and we both agreed that it's not something. I think we were both sort of astounded by how that even happens. Firstly, but it does make sense looking at what happened, the trajectory, and the impact, etc. The impact on the rails. But it was definitely very shocking to see. I think everybody had their heart in their mouth for a few minutes until we saw Grosjean come out of that fireball or that blaze. Um, Firstly, super happy that he was able to come out okay. And I even mentioned it yesterday. I dread to even think what would have happened if he had simply gone unconscious or passed out with that impact, because it's so easy for that to happen. Um, so very amazing that he had the wherewithal to undo his seat belts, disconnect from the seat, etc. Come out and jump out. Yeah, amazing. Secondly, with respect to the safety measures, I mean, you've got to agree. Whether it's Halo, whether it's how the cockpit is and the strength of the car, etc. Everything worked properly. This is exactly the scenario that everything that's on the car and how the cars are built are meant to prevent. Um, so great
So
testament to safety. I'm not saying it's the best right now, but we're certainly going in the right direction.
if I can add in there, I think it's beyond the car as well. The fact that he did not knock himself out, it's everything he was wearing also fell right in place, right from the hands device, which probably stopped his neck from snapping, to the helmet. All of this, like everything worked in sync for him to not pass out. But then again, I just read today that the fire suit they're wearing this year is a major upgrade to what they were wearing last year. The last year's fire suit was good for like about 10 seconds in the fire, but this fire suit is good for 20 seconds, but the gloves and shoes haven't been upgraded yet. So that's why he has burns on his palms and feet, but not anywhere else on his body. So that's brilliant as well. Just the timing of them getting the new suits this year.
I did not know that. That's actually very interesting. Um, and and first of all, if anyone hasn't seen Grosjean's state right now, he has escaped with just his hands are bandaged, but he's doing very well, much better than other people thought he would be doing. So the number one, that's great to hear. Number two, um, I'm also concerned about what happened just before the crash. Now, just rewinding a little bit to the moment before the crash itself. Do you? I was under the impression the steering column broke because I've never seen a driver weave across the entire track. And if you see the moment of contact, he was still going to the right. It's almost like somebody just put a huge weight on the right side of the car and it just swung to the right. Do you think that was a driver error or do you think it was a mechanical failure?
mm, if I can talk about that. So I remember seeing it, and when they were showing replays continuously on the stream, on the live stream, it looked like out of that corner itself, when they were on a straight line, I don't know if he was reacting to it, but the steering felt like it was tilted to the right on a very minor angle. But after that, the stream didn't show his onboard anymore for some reason. So, due to whatever reason, they had cut it off over there. And then he swerved right totally from Kvyat's point of view. So I had a doubt that there was an issue with the steering and hence it failed or something. But then later on, I think I was with a bunch of guys looking at watching the stream. So they were like, okay, fine, no, he was actually steering because the guys in front of him, the other drivers in front of him, were slower from on the corner exit. So he wanted to make a move but failed to notice Kvyat on the outside or to his right. So he went over his front left, and yeah, the rest was what happened.
I can only imagine how bad Kvyat would have been feeling after that, but he was really relieved to see Grosjean get out of the car. So it's tough to be on the receiving end, but having been the driver who's done that to another car, it genuinely would feel terrible. Like I can't imagine how it would feel having done that. So um, either way, everyone's okay. Everyone got out of it. Any other comments on the incident? Did I miss something from the crash itself?
To say that Karan Chandok was speaking, but the visuals did not match to what he was talking about. But he talked about some debris coming forward and hitting toward the front right side of Grosjean once Stroll re-entered the track. And according to Karun, he felt like Grosjean's steering like went right as soon as that debris made contact with his car. But then like I don't know. We haven't seen that footage anywhere. And the one replay they showed, I did not necessarily spot any debris hitting him. So
Um, yeah, so to make it clear, so it was actually supposed to have impacted his right front tire. That's what Karun Chandok particularly mentioned, and he didn't clearly tell whether it did make contact with the tire or not, but he told that he suspected that Grosjean reacted to it instinctively and steered to the right, but I don't think at that speed he would have even noticed the debris coming at him at that pace with all the things happening around him. So again, very questionable because until unless Grosjean talks about it, I don't think anyone's gonna know what exactly happened over there or what what was the reason at least. Um,
Grosjean's not going to remember any of it, talking from experience.
So I'm actually watching that video where Karin is actually going over the debris hitting, and I can see that Grosjean's actually swerving to the right even before the debris appears in view. So he's got lock on the steering wheel towards the right, and you can sort of it sort of makes sense because he's got a better run out of turn three compared to the cars ahead, and it's the straight at the start of the race, and obviously he's looking to make more positions, but I think he just forgets to see that there is Kvyat right next to him. And before the contact he has with Kvyat, he's actually turning left. So his intention is to go swerve to the right and overtake people. So he's got opposite lock towards the left on the steering. Um, the contact with Kvyat happens after he's got that lock. So his car sort of jumps up, which means that it's not able to fully turn in, and that prevents the car from turning in further, and it just goes and crashes. I think.
I also want to commend that's everyone says Formula One is the pinnacle of motorsport, and for me, it's not just the pinnacle of motorsport; it's the pinnacle of engineering. It's the pinnacle of individual ability and everything combined. Because number one, Grosjean getting out of the car, keeping himself awake through those G forces, everything. Um, and I know, I mean, I'm biased. Obviously, I'm a huge Formula One fan. I'm just a fan of the sport, but it's not just the drivers. It's not just the engineers. Everyone surrounding the sport is at the pinnacle of what they do. Right down to people within the medical car, the doctors, the way they reacted. And Ross Braun, I think, came out with this quote. Everyone did it with clear thought, exact decisions, did exactly what they needed to do. And it just shows that Formula One, while the drivers and the engineers may be getting the spotlight, it's all around. It is the pinnacle of sport, and everyone around it is inch perfect and measured in what they do. And it was a great day to be the fan of the sport, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. And probably Professor Sid Watkins looking from up there. This is everything he'd prepared Formula One to be able to react to, right? Like it was all of his idea, the medical car starting behind the pack to having a medical helicopter on the track every race. All of this was, it all started off with him. And I think all of this played part to protect and ensure that the drivers are safer than they've ever been.
Yeah. And just an FYI, there was, and me included, I was not the biggest fan of Halo when it first came, of the Halo device when it first came out. But I think this is the third life that the Halo has saved, if I'm not wrong.
Is it the third life?
Potent-
I can
Potentially.
count two.
I
I'm not
think
sure about
too.
what the third one is.
Yeah.
I don't remember somebody telling me third one and I took their word for it. But the two that I
So
can
I
remember,
remember Leclerc at Belgium, turn one,
and
Alonso's rear right, and this one. That's what I remember.
About the Belgium thing, by the way, I mean, I don't want to pull the topic away, but then I was having a random chat with Nisha today, earlier today. Apparently, simulations and a lot of calculations and reviewing about what happened, they had come to know that I think it was Alonso going over Leclerc, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And that particular crash,
Yeah.
in that exact moment, like Alonso's wheel would have missed Leclerc's helmet by a few centimeters, is what I believe. But then again, like it's all hearsay. Like I mean, like a couple of centimeters is absolutely nothing in Formula One.
Yeah,
Sure.
so that's what. But yeah, coming back to the Grosjean incident, just a few numbers. I mean, the most important number, which I think people would be interested to know, is he experienced a peak. I don't know if it's him or the car yet, because first of all, we don't have official reports out. But then the maximum Gs that were calculated at that point of contact, at that instant of contact, was 53 or 54 Gs, and that is um, I don't think there's any G that has been. I mean, these kind of forces even recorded in history, apparently, from another discussion I had with someone today. So that's like an extreme, and Grosjean even not blacking out at that point, thinking about it like it's really inhuman what he did. And about the Halo, that was the reason why he was able to egress from the car itself in the first place. Because if not for the Halo, he might have not made contact necessarily with the barrier, but he would have not had a way out of the car itself. So that's something to note for sure. Yeah. So other than that, I think yeah, the car splitting and the reason it caught fire again. Do you guys have anything about that? Why the car necessarily caught fire? Because they're not supposed to catch fire.
Well, I think the car split pretty much at the point where the fuel cell is in the car, right? It's right behind the cockpit.
Yes.
So I'm pretty sure at some point somewhere fuel must have spilled in the process of the car breaking apart, and any amount of friction going into that process would have instantly made it catch fire.
Yeah, so particularly the fill neck. So the fuel tank has a fill neck coming up from it. That was the part which apparently ruptured or failed, and there was a slight fuel leak, which again, any amount of fuel leak, like how you mentioned about the
Hmm.
with
Yep.
friction would cause that fire. There is also, since these are hybrid cars, they also have a battery pack, which was also supposed to have split during the whole crash. And well, in people were talking about battery catching fire, but I don't think that's the case, because we would have had a fire which
No.
was dazzling white, so that didn't
Correct.
happen.
Yeah. Definitely not. No.
Yeah.
I don't think they use the same batteries in Formula One cars anyway. That can catch fires like they think road cars with those batteries may. I'm not sure about that, but
It's
I
the
think that's the
same,
case.
to my best knowledge, it's the same battery, but then
Is it?
maybe
Okay.
better safely packed battery, maybe. I guess I'm not exactly
Could be.
sure. Yeah. But yeah, that you can see later on during the process of, I mean, later on, all the images and short videos that were posted on the Instagram page of F1 and all, you can see the Haas mechanics coming out with those special gloves so that you don't get electrocuted while handling battery parts. They come out with that and a set of big pliers to cut off the battery and take those parts aside, because yeah, they still are dangerous after the crash. But yeah, that was about the flame, which why it burst into flames.
Yep. Okay, I think it's time to move on. Let's actually get into the race because the race didn't really begin until pretty much lap 10. I think lap 10 was the first
Yeah.
full lap of the race. Second safety car coming out very quickly thanks to Daniel Kvyat and Lance Stroll. What do you guys think about that incident?
I'm probably gonna have to leave soon because I again am one of the few idiots who prefer work to podcast, which is absolutely asinine. But I just want to weigh in here real quick. Now, I'm not saying that the it was Kvyat's fault completely, but I think he stuck his nose in. Um, that being said, the 10 seconds was way too harsh. I think uh,
Yep.
a slap on the wrist should have been enough. A black and
Yeah.
white flag, or even a black and white flag would actually be perfect for this scenario. But I think that after what had just happened with Grosjean, the FIA wanted to make a statement that safety comes first, and especially with Lance Stroll
Yep.
upset, he was given the penalty. But I think it just happened as a result of the Grosjean incident that stewards probably took a harsher look at keeping racing safe rather than a slap on the wrist like they probably have done in Austria in the past or in Monza with Leclerc in multiple different scenarios.
No. Yeah, I agree. I think 10 seconds was surprising for me, and I do think it was excessive.
I agree. I
In
felt like
my personal
Lance.
opinion was that it should have been a racing incident, but I would agree with Mara. Maybe at the most a black and white flag, but nothing more than that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was a racing incident. When I watched it live, I thought like Kvyat just sent it on the inside. But the more you look at it, he had a fair bit of his car heading into the braking zone, so it wasn't a dive bomb per
Correct.
se. And and
Correct.
and even the angle he was in, he was like as far inside as possible. But Lance pretty much completely shut the door as though he was doing a quali lap where he's running over the curve. And I mean, like the first lap after safety car restart, I think every driver should be wary of a possibility, and Lance just went right across.
Wasn't there, I guess in 2018 or the finale of 2019 where Grosjean had
Abu
tipped
Dhabi.
over, yeah, in Abu Dhabi, the season
Hmm.
finale in, I think Grosjean tipped over Hulkenberg, so I guess it was 2019?
Uh, 2018, I think, wasn't it?
I believe
Or was it last year?
I think
Uh,
18.
I think it was 2018 because if I'm not wrong, there were halos on the
Yeah.
car.
yeah,
Yeah.
there were halos on the car.
Then
It
it's
was
2018.
2018. Yeah, it was 2018. I think that the only difference between this and that incident was that that chicane at Abu Dhabi, the middle part of that, as in from the first corner to the next one, it, it's slightly lengthier. And Hulkenberg and Grosjean sort of drove side by side for a little while because you can always have another car taking a cutback line with the car on the outside in the first corner, becoming the car on the inside for the next one, which was the case with Grosjean. So it wasn't similarly the case here that Kvyat and Stroll were side by side for some amount of time going into the corner. It sort of did look like Kvyat stuck his nose in there a little bit, but it didn't seem as if he did something significantly wrong. I mean, he has if he's not diving in surprising like that, then he has the right to go for an open gap.
Yep, so that was a small comparison, but yeah, the circumstances were totally different. Moving on
Yep.
about,
So we did
yeah,
lap 10, and I know that pretty much all of you feel that the race was pretty stale. But come on,
Mhm.
like leave Hamilton or Verstappen out of it. Probably like beyond that, it was so exciting because you had all of the midfield changing positions, and there were quite a few overtakes. It wasn't as stale. I think like Sainz with quite a few moves from P15 to P5. And I think that part was so exciting because like when I was watching this race, I didn't really care about what's happening on top because it's like pretty much become a constant now. But the battle for P3, it's just so interesting. It's almost like if the same battle for P3 was for P1 per se, people would have loved this race because it went through so many different um, possible leads at P3 in the constructors.
I agree with you, Rusty, that at the start of the race, it was exciting. And Sainz was very quickly, I think within the first 5 laps, turning out to be pretty much my driver of the day. Um, I was surprised initially that he didn't pit. He stayed on the softs after the red flag. But I guess in hindsight, that was a good tire to sort of charge through the field when it wasn't really spread out. And it turned out well for him. But I think after that, what I was looking forward to after Sainz settled into the sort of top 5, top 6, I was really looking forward to the Renault versus McLaren battle. The Renault guys, I think, took early pit stops. McLaren was responding. And then a couple of laps later, Ricardo and Ocon started fighting each other. And they just lost it for the team. It was just, I don't know, it
Exactly.
just
I
seemed
think on the
idiotic. Um,
yeah. So talking about that battle, I think on the second stint, um, Ricardo on the softer tire was clearly faster, but they decided not to call team orders, and Leclerc
yeah.
pit and came out right in between Ocon and Ricardo, and that probably cost Ricardo a bunch of time, and that's why he finished behind Gasly, and he was never up there with the McLaren boys beyond that.
No, but I think McLaren guys pitted before Leclerc as well, right? They
Yeah,
pitted after
McLaren were
Renault.
clearly ahead, yeah, but
And
Ricardo was catching up.
I think the intention of Renault pitting both of their drivers was to do an undercut on the McLaren guys. But after the late pit stop that McLaren did, they were still ahead. Uh, and that was just showing off, telling off how much time they lost fighting each other.
So,
Then one more thing. Okay, go on, Harshit.
yeah, so worth point to be noted. I think I don't remember the lap of the race, but then there was a point where Ocon was in front of Ricardo, and Ricardo was really faster. I think because he had the softer tire. No, he had the fresher tire, not the softer tire.
That was the first stint.
Yeah, so what happened over
Yeah.
there was I think they were supposed to run. I mean, people were expecting, and the commentators were talking about possible team order where Ricardo can go, but then they lost a place to one of the McLarens, or both of the McLarens in that case. They were running up there at P4 or P5, if I'm right, but they were fighting. The team let them fight instead of calling the order, and then yeah, I think the opportunistic drivers just grabbed those positions, and then they played team orders, but it was just too late into the race after that.
In any case, wasn't really, I don't know, didn't seem very well planned from the team. When they had to ask them to stop fighting and work together, they didn't. When they had to ask one of the drivers to get out the day and get out the way, they didn't in time. I think they just lost out on points, some easy points, because you would expect a team like Renault to be quicker, especially when there's on a track like Bahrain. We've seen all season that they've got good straight line speed.
Yes,
Yeah, but
absolutely.
Actually,
and
before
overtake.
Rusty, before you say
Yeah.
that point, guys, I'm gonna have to excuse myself right now, but I will tune in later. And a few things I'm really interested about hearing is finally some appreciation about Albon and how unlucky Perez is. I'm probably gonna watch the podcast after a bit just to hear those 2 points. So, thank you so much for being amazing uh, co-hosts. I'll best of luck for the rest of it. Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
you.
Thank you, Mara. Yes. So coming back to my point, like we're
Yeah.
seeing Sainz put all of these charges up. We've seen Gasly make all these charges up the field. But Bottas, I was really looking forward to Bottas. He had pretty much the whole race to try and put a charge in, but that Mercedes just does not want to follow a car.
Yeah, I think the commentators made that very evident in terms of how that car is designed. I'm not sure who it was, but one of them mentioned about how they spoke with somebody in the Mercedes garage and asked them the question, how much do you how much time do you spend in designing the car from the point of view of being able to chase or follow? And there were like zero effort put into following another
Exactly.
car. And that just goes to show. One important point I thought of yesterday when I was watching Bottas trying to recover was that if you remember Hamilton serving his penalty at Monza, falling right at the back of the field, and pulling up to what, P6 or P7 by the end,
7, I think.
in 20 or 25, whatever, how many of the laps were. It didn't seem too far off, right? Bottas coming from, and if you remember in Monza, we had a lot more retirements. I think, if I'm not wrong.
4 retirements to
Um,
be precise, and Hamilton finished
correct,
in P7.
correct. So if you put that into perspective, Bottas finishing in P8 after what, a puncture, being P20 at the start of the race, didn't seem very far off from that.
I disagree because, like, Bottas was P16. I think Magnussen also had to. A couple of people also had to get their wings changed, so they also pit, and Bottas came out P16 at the restart. But Hamilton varies a little because when he came out, he was about 20 seconds away from the pack because he had to pit while the rest of them were running. But Bottas joined right at the end of the pack, so he just had overtaking to do, whereas Lewis also had to catch up to the pack.
Well,
So I feel like
a
Bottas
counterpoint to
really,
that would be it's easier for a car like Mercedes to run in clean air without any traffic ahead of it and have speed and have pace. It's much
yeah.
more difficult for the Mercedes car to follow because we know how the engine gets overheated, how tires get overheated, etc.
But talking about the engine again, like you don't see Racing Point struggle to keep up with a car, but Mercedes clearly is. And then again, like McLaren might be worried if it's the power unit which is overheating, and if it's not cooling systems which haven't been designed for this, because McLaren's shifting to the Mercedes power unit. So that's pretty much a make or break for them next season, I believe.
So about that, I think the smallest radiators on the grid is run by the Merc, and that's like how Black Sheep mentioned. That's their idea or thought process while they're designing the vehicle or the engine or the power unit itself. Whereas, even though your team is running a Merc engine in terms of how the Racing Point is, I think they still get to choose what kind of a radiator they want to run, or if they want to redesign their radiator, to my knowledge. So if they have a bigger radiator compared, I mean, more surface area where it's cooling the engine better, yes, they can definitely run closer to another car and not have issues like how the Mercedes does when they're following cars. So I think that should be an answer to the point which you
Yeah.
raised, Nisha.
And there's a multitude of factors, Rusty. The Mercedes has a larger wheelbase. It also runs on a massive amount of downforce, probably more than any other car. So you have all those things creating more and more sort of pressure on the power unit in pushing the car along, right?
Yeah, makes
There's
sense.
that means there's more strain on the tires too. Tires get heated quicker, engine gets heated quicker, and we have seen these things, right? There are issues with tires and the engine for the last couple of years.
Yeah. They just like you mentioned earlier again, they just have that thought process or that idea of design where they expect to be the lead car always, so they do not
Yeah.
have good enough cooling, they do not, and yeah, all those points about extra drag and bigger wheelbase, yeah, all of that sums up to them not being able to follow a car at all compared to their similarly powered teams like RPs, or in the future the McLarens. So, moving on, anyone wants to talk about Albon, since we don't have his.
Before we get there, sorry for the little pause from me. I was trying to think of, in the meantime, I was trying to think of what happened in terms of what was eventful after the first set of pit stops, and I genuinely couldn't think of anything.
Talk about
Um,
Sainz's overtake on Leclerc. I think that's
uh,
probably my moment of the race. That was like full send, and that was just brilliant to watch.
oh yeah, Science was very racy, and that's to be expected, right? He had a much smaller window at the beginning of the race when he was on the softs, to make the absolute most of it, and he certainly did. Um, but yeah, a fantastic move. Is that pretty much the only place where we saw overtakes being done in the race? Bottom of turn one.
Yeah, I think so. I think we saw a
Ouch.
move into turn 10. I'm not sure, but mostly it was all just turn 1.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think we
turn.
saw a Daniel Ricciardo lunge into turn 10, or an attempted lunge with massive locking up. I'm not sure. I think it was at the start of the race. I don't think he was able to pull it off, but I can't remember any other moves. Some test turn 11, I think cars was kind of behind the car ahead again. Um, a couple of other attempts I think were made at turn 4. Um, because the switchback of DRS basically helps the car just being overtaken with another go into turn 4. But again, not a lot that I saw. Um, yeah, pretty much turn 1. Getting into
Um,
turn 1, probably the only place where we saw a lot of moves.
just to confirm, turn 10 is that moving towards the left, that heavy braking zone downhill, right?
Yeah, as a
Correct.
double apex, the one before the DRS zone.
Because
Yeah.
if I remember right, Ricardo even made a beautiful move. Actually, two people made positions on a particular driver. I do not remember exactly who it was, but Ricardo was the
It
second
was
person.
the first one was Bottas and Magnussen, I think.
Yeah, so I think Ricardo made a move immediately later into um, turn 8, if I'm right, where it's a downhill braking zone and then there's a right uh, towards the turn 9 and turn 10. So over there, he made a really good move, snaking up
Yes,
literally through the inside.
that was
Just,
on that was on Leclerc, wasn't it?
yeah, so that's what I don't remember exactly who, that's why I asked, but it
Oh, shit,
could be.
I didn't want to move on to Leclerc because that was just sad to
Yeah,
see at the start of the race. He made up so many positions and just one by one just being
Eaton.
decimated. Positions just going away.
I,
The Renaults, the McLarens just flying past him.
well, I'm not gonna. I didn't bring up that topic on purpose because personally, being a Ferrari fan, I'm just waiting,
Yeah.
biting through the season.
Let's make the misery worse. But there's actually a clip. I mean, on the race, they played Vettel complaining about how the car was undrivable. But
Yes.
he said that because out of turn 11, like not even on the entry, pretty much once you're completely on the throttle out of turn
I know.
11, moving to the left, he spun. Like the
It's
car's
flat
rear.
out, pretty much straight.
Exactly.
It's not really even a, the little kink to the left after turn 11.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah,
hardly even a corner. They're just moving across the track with flat
exactly.
out, full on the throttle, and the car just randomly spins. I have no idea how that happens.
Yeah,
Exactly. And it reached a point where he just laughed it out because if it was his mistake or if he knew what happened, he would have given thought to it. But he's like, this car's just spun on its own. Like, what do I have to do?
is it? I
Yeah.
mean, I know this is really something which everyone's been questioning or it's been put to rest now, but is it possible, just remotely possible, that Ferrari are giving a totally different car? I mean, not totally different car, but a different car compared to Leclerc. So, I mean, is it that he's not able to set up the car well? What do you think could be that? What do you think that mistake is due to?
Well, I don't think Ferrari are doing anything on his car that will cause him to spin or make mistakes because it's not in Ferrari's interest. Why would any team do that? But that's not to say that he's getting the first upgrade in any of the cars, because the first upgrades are probably going to Leclerc. But that doesn't mean that his car is somehow compromised by Ferrari.
Yeah, could
Racing
be.
Point, they've got the budget and the resources to bring out updates for both the cars at the same time. But I just feel like both of them have very different driving styles.
Yep.
And I think that's probably why the car just doesn't suit Vettel. Because, like, I think from last season, like from early last season, you saw Leclerc showing a lot of promise. And I just
Mhm.
felt like since then, all of the development has been to suit Charles as opposed to Sebastian. And I
I
think
don't.
that's why we're seeing that.
I'm going to slightly disagree. I don't think that the car is somehow designed to suit Charles. I think Leclerc is a fantastic driver in his own league who can adapt to the car driving, the car being whatever way it is. And it's not that Leclerc has anyhow in any way been happy with his car. He's complained about it as much as maybe, or maybe not as much, but he's complained about the car enough times, especially at the start of the season, how undrivable it was. Um, After every dismal performance, he has pretty much the same line to say that despite the car we have, we're still doing what we can. I mean, it just goes to show that he's not fully behind the car himself, but it just goes to show how great a driver he is. With Vettel, that doesn't mean that he's not a great driver. Obviously, he is. But I think it's just how his driving style is. If he doesn't have that confidence in the rear of the car, it's either all the way or nowhere for him, I think.
Also for Charles, it's probably easier to. I mean, like this is all speculation. I'm not taking anything away from Vettel, who's
Mhm.
one of the greatest of our generation in his own right. But Charles just moved from F3 to F2 immediately to F1, and then F1 he
Yeah.
had a new car the very next season. So he's been through a bunch of different cars back to back every season. So that's probably aided him in being able to adapt better than Vettel has, because Vettel drove that Red Bull, which handled similarly for all those years, and then he came to Ferrari, settled in. So I just feel like maybe that's helped someone like Leclerc more than it's helped Vettel.
It could be the case. I'm not gonna base everything on that point, but I don't know. It's conjecture. You could be right.
Moving on,
Let's, yes.
moving on. Um, Before we move on, I think like Leclerc's definitely my driver of the season. But we were talking about people complaining about their cars, and Albon's been complaining about his car for pretty much the whole season, and he finally got something going his way today. I
Um,
mean,
I don't
like
think
this
it
weekend.
was this weekend. I think he's had decent. He's actually had a decent running over the last few races. He was doing really well, I think, in Imola, barring that very last at the end of the race, sort of turn two spin, chasing Signs. I think it was. Barring that, he was up there pretty much the entire weekend. Um, I'm I'm of the view that I'm very realistic when it comes to Albon. Nobody expects him to be getting the most out of that car, or nobody expects him. I'm reasonable with my expectations with him. I don't expect him to match Max. I think what Red Bull even expect of him is that he's at least up there. If that car deserves to be P4 or P5 or on the second or third row of the grid, his job is simply to be on the second or third row of the grid. As long as he's doing that, I'm happy with it. If he's not comfortable with the car, maybe he needs more time and he'll get used to it, and finally he'll have some pace coming his way. But I think even Red Bull are realistic in their expectations of their second driver. They don't expect anybody to be matching Max at the moment.
And
So with
talking
that,
about
in
that,
that regard, if I just finish what I was saying about the last couple of races, he had a very decent race in Turkey. He had a very decent race here as well. Qualifying fourth on the grid is exactly what's expected of him, and he did. He qualified ahead of the racing points. Great job. He wasn't able to catch up to Perez in race pace, but Perez is one of the best drivers, probably top three drivers when it comes to being on pace during the race. It's not the easiest thing to pass him or come close to a driver like him. So yeah, well done. And if he got lucky with the podium, then that's part of the sport. People do get lucky. If you're in a good position to capitalize on faults of or mistakes or damage or retirements of other people, then that's it counts.
yeah.
well,
So you pointed out that Albon started P4, and I think that's the biggest plus point this weekend: the fact that he's been able to quali on the second grid. Because I think that's something. I think his pace on Sunday has always been there. Red Bull have been using him as a guinea pig to test tires during race day, but he's still
Yeah,
constantly finished in the top six, irrespective of not having the ideal strategy. But I think what's helped him a lot this weekend is the fact that he started P4, which is
yeah,
amazing, because I think Red Bull more than race pace. I think everyone knows that Albon is a good driver, but it's just about him underperforming on Saturdays, which is putting all that pressure on him. So
true.
starting P4 behind Max this week, that really let him calm down, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I remember at the start of the season, on pretty much the first half of the season, where he was having dismal performances in qualifying. He was pretty much at the back of the grid or towards the end of the top 10, etc. And Red Bull were just having to make just very odd pit calls for him, just randomly pitting him. And it just seemed like they had no hope that was expected from him. Um, but that doesn't seem to be the case over the last few races. Red Bull have not made some of those silly calls, which to me is an indication of the fact that, okay, they are starting to trust that, let him race on his day. If he's able to qualify well, then let him be. And we'll get him to pit when he genuinely needs to pit and when his strategy calls for a pit stop, as opposed to let's test out a strategy for him and see how that might go for Max later on in the race.
Yeah, you're right, absolutely. But I wanted to ask about the expectation from the second driver. Well, to be precise, Red Bull are technically fighting for the, if not for the constructor title, they are fighting to be second. I mean, trying to get maximum points. This season, it isn't being felt that much because they do not have a third team pushing them as much as it was in the previous seasons by Ferrari. But
Hmm.
then, uh, maybe when you have all three of the top teams actually fighting it out between themselves for the constructors, I think they will definitely feel Alex Albon not performing up to their mark because they need both their drivers getting maximum points every race, weekend and every weekend. So that's gonna be something if Ferrari bounce back up next season, which I am not going to be very, I'm going to be very calculatively skeptical or whatever the word is over there, but
Speculative.
speculative
Yes.
about. But if Ferrari are up there next season, they will definitely need Albon to perform really well. And considering the point that his graph has been going upwards both in quali and in race over the past few weekends, I mean, let's not talk about the race finishes because prior to the Bahrain Grand Prix, he's not been doing all that great. But considering that his qualifying positions have improved really, really well, and he's consistently coming up into the top five, top six qualifying positions, I think, yeah, if it all proves out to be a really good improvement in the next season, then they shouldn't be complaining. But if he's not able to perform, then they need a better driver to try for the constructor title. To if
Yeah, I agree. I'm not saying he's the best driver for Red Bull. And I'm all for him not being in the car if he doesn't perform, I guess, next year or next season. Um, I'm not a fanboy in any way, but I want a fair chance for him. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say. One thing I'm going to take issue with, Harry, you mentioned, you alluded to somehow indirectly or directly stating that Red Bull somehow were contending for championship this season.
no, they
I
aren't.
think that was pretty much for the first one or two races. I think they know where they are, and it saddened me a lot yesterday, where on lap what 44, 45, with more than 10 laps to go, they decide to pit Verstappen to go for fastest lap. It's not even to the end of the race, and it just goes to show that once the race has begun, 10, 15, 20 laps are done, and that's it. They know that that's where they are and that's where they're going to finish. There's no scope for anything else. Red Bull was a team where that used to kind of, think out of the box, on their feet, in terms of strategy, in terms of tire choices, calls on the fly during the race. Um, and it's just sad to see that that's just not, there's no, they don't seem to have any scope of that anymore. It's like, okay, Hamilton's 10 seconds ahead. We know already we're never going to catch him. Let's just pit again, go for fastest laps, even with what 12 laps to go in the race. I mean,
But
that's just sad state of affairs.
but I don't have a problem with that call because like if a safety, I mean the only way they could have won it if there was a safety car which was there for a couple of laps and
Hmm.
Max would have been on the back of Lewis on softs. But apart from that, I think they're realistic as well. No one's catching Lewis Hamilton when he's
I agree.
P1.
I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with being realistic. I'm just saying that it's sad that it's come to this point where um, the top three or top two teams are just so far apart from everybody else. In fact, even between them, they're so far apart that they themselves don't see any scope of challenging the other team. Top two teams in Formula One, pinnacle of motorsport, shouldn't be racing this way. I mean, kudos to Mercedes. Yes, they've developed a fantastic car, but there's something gravely wrong going on if that's the state in which the top teams, the front runners, are racing. Man, they're just going around the circuit. I mentioned to Mara in the middle of the race yesterday. I think that I noticed lap 10 the race actually began, and I noticed lap 16 the gap to the driver that was last on the grid was about 38 seconds. That's 6 laps, and the
Yeah.
field is spread over 38 seconds. It's unbelievable.
Well, yeah, that shows the performance gap. I mean, uh, there's nothing that can be done right now, but hopefully those rule changes, those major rule changes which are
Certainly.
coming out
Yep.
in 22, I mean 2022, should you know, shuffle the pack up maybe, or maybe at least bunch them up together and keep it close. But let's just wait and watch. It's all fingers crossed till then, I guess.
Talking about the future, I mean, like when you look at the driver standings, there's an intense battle for P4. Danny Ricciardo, Perez, Leclerc, 2 points off each. And then you've got Lando and Sainz about 15 points away. Sainz and Albon level. But let's just talk about Perez. I mean, your heart goes out to him. He's one of the nicest lads on the grid. He literally saved that team. He decided to not take salary. He tried to do everything he could to try and keep the team afloat. But I mean, how can you not have space for him on the grid next year as of now?
Mm, well, I would
I don't know.
say.
It's a multitude of factors. Harry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I would say whenever they started talking about, I mean, Vettel and the going to be Aston Martin Works team, that is Racing Point right now. Whenever they got into talks, I think at that point Racing Point had three options in front of them, out of which one option was set. Even though I think they've still not signed the contract with Lance, but yeah, his dad owns the team, so he's obviously gonna get the seat. There's no question about that. So between a four-time world champion and a person who's and a driver who is consistently good, is has been with the team since the start and has been sacrificing and gone through the team through its ups and downs. I think emotion gets played out right now. Formula One isn't a sport where you can be emotional, because once you get emotional, I think you're gonna start making wrong decisions. Not necessarily always right, but you will be making a few wrong decisions. So I think they just went for the better guy at the end of the day. But again, that is to be seen next season, or maybe in 2022, if they made the right call and push Perez out of the seat.
Yep.
Not 2020 to 2021, but I mean, Perez had a PU failure. We've seen it happen before. Just terrible with the timing. But look, if I'm a midfield team, right? Like Perez has to be your dream driver if you're a midfield or a lower midfield team. A, he does bring in money. B, he sets up the car brilliantly, and that's going to help. I mean, you've seen Racing Point, you've seen Force India, they've always been punching above their weight with respect to uh,
Hmm.
development and the budget. So he's brilliant for that heading into the new regulations. And on pace itself, he's a brilliant driver. So if I was any of the midfield teams, he'd be one of the first names. And I feel like, I don't know, like, I understand there's so much more with respect to Haas potentially going for Mazepin and Mick, but
Yep.
it is
I
sad
mean, a
to
lot of
not
factors are at play.
have him.
There's a lot of money
Yeah.
involved, where you have someone like Mazepin coming in, but Formula One is a sport that functions on money. We know that. Um, you can't also say that he deserves a seat more than another driver on the grid in a midfield team, because I mean, they're all great drivers, and if they have contracts in place, then a team can't simply revoke that. And I'm sure they have their own preferences and long-term plans with drivers, especially with a lot of teams having their own driver academies. Um, so it's not the easiest call to make just because he's a great driver and he doesn't have a seat. And I mean, he's stated that he's happy to sit out a year if it means that he gets to make a comeback in 22, which is fair enough. Yes, nothing wrong with that. I think Renault are experimenting with an Alonso return. That probably took up one spot on the grid. I really expected at least that spot to be open if Ricardo was moving to McLaren. But alas, I'm not going to make any comments on
Comments.
whether Alonso has to come back or not. I personally feel that I think his time is done, and there is enough talent coming through the ranks, and it's sad to see a driver like Perez, who for me is probably one of the top three drivers of this year so far, not having a seat.
Yeah, I mean, when we saw that puff of smoke when he was coming down the start finish straight on that, I think it was on the 21st lap. It was, or 20, no, it was not the 21st lap. It was a little before, I think. It was really heartbreaking. I mean, there were everyone, you could hear that collective, what do you call it, that sigh of frustration and sadness for the driver. I mean, he was driving an excellent race. He was actually trying to make a move on Max initially in the one of the safety car restarts, to my best knowledge. But yeah, Max being Max, shut the door and told him to stay
Yeah.
in his place. So yeah, he deserved that third place. And one of the reasons why I feel Albon, I mean, not only me, few comments about Albon not deserving third place came out. But yeah, that fire that started on that Merc PO, some people even secretively wanted it to happen to Hamilton, and yeah, all sorts of
I think
things.
everybody wants that to happen to Hamilton in every single race and every single session,
Yes.
but it doesn't.
Well, that's something which we'll wish for even in the last two races coming up in the calendar. But um, moving
No,
on.
actually, to be honest, I don't wish that upon any driver. If somebody wants to win, then they have to. It's. I'd rather they win on merit.
Okay, well, you're talking about winning on merit, but then Albon getting the P3, not on his own
Yeah, but I
merit.
didn't. At no point do I say that that's he raced for that and he grabbed that position. But what do you expect him to do? What, retire the car and not get a podium? I mean,
No.
it
Well,
doesn't really make sense.
yeah, I,
Look,
I, I
all
was
the
just
small things, right? So you can't necessarily take anything away from him. But one more thing, like, we were talking about Perez's retirement. I just like to point out that Racing Point let him go on for quite a while because I've seen teams ask the driver to stop the car immediately to prevent the fire and to be able to salvage whatever's available. But Racing Point let him try until the absolute limit to try and get to the line or to hope that something will fix itself or whatever they were thinking because he went on for quite a few corners since the first
Yep.
massive puff of smoke.
Yep.
so
Absolutely.
they had the puff of smoke on the start finish straight, and um, I think
Exit
on
of turn
the
10.
yeah exit of turn 10 they stopped the car, so that was almost half a lap. So yeah, it's really sad that, I mean, that showed the amount of frustration and desperation they were trying to get that car across the line, but unfortunate over there. Anyway,
Yep.
um, coming back to, I mean, uh, about next weekend, that is the outer ring of Bahrain, if I'm right. It's somewhat styled like an Indy circuit, am I right?
You could say so.
Yeah, so about that, well, being a Ferrari fan again, very sad that it's gonna be like that. But something which is power friendly, and a Ferrari is almost down by I think about 10 kilometers per hour down on the top speed. So yeah, but about that, do you think the Mercedes will dominate in this track or in this second Bahrain outer ring track, or do you think there's gonna be something different?
I don't see it changing, to be honest, in any way.
Either, yeah.
You don't see anything changing? Well, I think the Red Bull might be able to get closer to the Mercedes because one, the Merc has the powerful power unit. I mean, the more powerful power unit, but considering they have a lot of drag on that car and all of that, and in the midfield, especially if you notice, Renault has a really good straight line speed compared to the Racing Point and the McLaren, and I would expect them to be doing really well. And yeah, Ferrari, I'm not going to talk about the Ferrari power teams because it's just a painful weekend for them coming up. But yeah, any other predictions you'll have for that weekend?
Just to interject over there, you talked about downforce and all of that, but let's talk about Monza. I think the closest you'll get with respect to how many straights there are. And both the Mercedes were almost like 7 to 8 tenths quicker then Sainz, who started P3. So I don't really see the Mercedes. I think it's just one of the most well-rounded cars of all time, and that's why it's just so dominant.
Well, then I think that is what it is. That's your opinion, and I would respect it. Just the like I said, everyone wants to see the best performing team who's running away. I mean, look at that. They're sorry about that. I think you can see in the constructors that they've run away with the championship. They're almost twice the points more than the second placed constructor. So everyone wants to
Yep.
see a different face on the top step of the podium. So maybe that's what is you know inspiring me to talk or make that kind of a prediction for the
Well,
next race.
let's be realistic here. I mean, I don't think there's anyone who will expect any other team apart from Mercedes to win the race at Bahrain, given that it's going to be even more of a power hungry circuit the next one, without the extremely slow corners that we have in Sector 2 currently at Bahrain. Um, and I've mentioned it a couple of times to some of my other friends, my girlfriend, and some other people in the community here, that I think expectations have to be realistic. We've known this from the start of the season. There's no point in hoping for a Hamilton retirement or Mercedes not winning a race, etc. Let's enjoy the great fight that we're seeing in the midfield. Let's be happy with that. Team affiliations are secondary. Let's appreciate the fight that we are getting, and let's not forget that this is a year where this at the start of the year we didn't even know whether or not we're going to have a season of Formula One. And to have a season where we've seen such competition in the midfield, um, I can't feel anything but just happy with the fact that we've seen some great drivers, some great performances. Yes, sad about Ferrari, sad about Vettel, Leclerc, etc. Um, but yeah, let's make the most of it. The championships are done. Let's just sit back and enjoy some racing now.
Yes, and championships are done, but yeah, after that race, I think McLaren have run away with it. So with the P3, but let's see, there are two more races. But yeah, I guess the championship wins are yeah taken away. So the midfield battle is what we'll all be more interested to see. But other
Yep.
than that, yeah, I don't think there's much more to look forward in the season, especially.
Yep. I'm just going to be glad that it's going to be a new sort of a circuit that we'll get to see. The Sector 2 at Bahrain is going to be different, yes, but I'll still look forward to it. I'm going to quickly come back to the Perez point because we have a question in chat from Mr. Adil Chinoy.
Oh.
And he's asked about Perez. Should there be a penalty / fine for Racing Point for allowing Perez to continue pretty much half the lap that Harry you mentioned?
Mm,
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that because from turn one to turn eight, he could have stopped at a bunch of points where it's easier to take the car away. But he decided to keep pushing, and at turn one, at turn 10, it's one of those corners which is right in the middle of the track, so it's quite hard to take the car away, and he just kept pushing. So I agree. I think like it's a fair point. FIA should probably at least give a warning to Racing Point because let's be honest, they were risking Perez's safety, they were risking the safety of cars behind because you never know how, like the commentators were talking about last night, fire is something which is a variable. You really can't quantify it, and it just wasn't the safest call. I think
Well,
definitely.
to be fair, there was fire from the engine when he came out of turn 10, and probably around, I don't know, 70 meters after that, he stopped the car. I mean,
yes.
until that
Yeah,
point, up
but that
until turn
fire
10, there was just
you
some smoke.
saw you saw fire at turn 10 because it came outside the shielding at turn 10. But I'm pretty sure the team, with all those sensors they've got and all that smoke is obviously a byproduct of combustion. So, I mean, the team would have figured out that there's something burning on the inside.
Well, also added to the fact, I mean, there might be a doubt about oils or fluids being spilt all over the track. Um, I'm not sure whether it did happen, but to my eye, I didn't see any kind of. They even showed Alex's onboard when he was smoking all around the track till turn 10. Didn't see much of oil, so yeah, there might be a warning at most. I don't see a very major
Infringement.
fine or
Issue. Yeah.
infringement over there. But yeah, there might be a warning for sure because it was definitely blocking the visibility of two drivers coming up from behind.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, nothing more than that, Mr. Adil Shenoy.
What I remember of it was all the way from the start finish line up to say turn 8, the exit of turn 8, where Lance Stroll uh, went the other way around. There was intermittent puffs of smoke coming out. There wasn't a plume of constant smoke coming out of the car,
Yeah.
which I agree is a safety hazard because it obstructs the vision, etc., of other drivers. Exit of turn 8 is when there was a constant, basically, cloud of smoke coming out of the car.
Hmm.
And about, I think, 2 corners later, Perez was on the side of the track. So I don't think there's anything massive in that because we see a lot of plumes of smoke randomly coming out of cars here and there. Sometimes we've even seen it stop and the car just continue. I've seen that a couple of times. Um, so yeah, I don't think there's anything massive. There's certainly no leakage that was visible on track of oil or any sort of spillage. And I'm pretty sure if Racing Point allowed his car, I mean, they're not going to put Perez at risk if the car is about to blow up or something. So I'm pretty sure they would have had the data to see whether this was something that was drivable because they still had about 2.5 laps to go, right? Um, if it was certainly just if it was requiring of a stop instantly as soon as the first bit of smoke came out, then I'm sure they would have. They wouldn't put the car at risk, risking more cost and damage to their vehicle and their driver. It doesn't make sense.
Fair.
Yes. Go ahead, Rusty.
No, that's a very fair assessment, and I think that's all for today's race.
Yeah, I think we've covered it
Any
all.
any any predictions for the next one?
Before we move on to the next one, I think we're sort of drifting away from our tradition of our each of us naming our driver of the day and not the driver of the day. I feel like we
Oof.
should have a jingle for this, but anyway, we'll see if we can work on this later. But go on, we'll start with you, Harry. We'll move on to you, Rusty.
So my driver of the day, tough to call, but I would say I'm gonna give Pierre Gasly the driver of the day because purely because he came from way back. No, he was on the sorry, he went into Q3. My bad. So
He
he
was in,
did.
he was P9 or P10, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yes, he finished the race in P6. But the reason I told that is I'm giving him my driver of the day would be because he just did two pit stops to my best knowledge. One was the obvious because of the red flag in the start, but the other one was just going on to a fresher set of hards to go to the end of the race, and I think that's what gave him that P6, or else he was way out of the points. Whereas everyone else around him have pit for pressure mediums or pressure hards, and the likes of Max and Ricardo pitting again to Max pitting for the fastest lap. So yeah, I think he did a really good job to keep the car up there and give those maximum points possible from his side for the team. Um,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah, my driver of the day. Well, um, I would say Bottas because I mean he messed up his start completely. Yes, agreed that he did have a car that overheats and can't run in dirty air, but uh, I expected more from him. I was expecting he would be able to close up to Gasly at least.
Well, he was hampered by a puncture that wasn't his fault at all, right?
Uh,
Out of turn, was it turn 6?
that was just after this. If you're talking about the first puncher, yes, I agree.
Yeah.
But then he still, even after that first puncher, he was still at least mathematically and technically he was expected to close up to Gasly at least or make a move in fact for P6. But then that didn't happen, and yes, he had one lap lesser to race because the last lap had Perez got stopped because of his retirement and the safety. They finished behind the safety car. So, and yes, he had a suspected uh, puncture even during that final safety car. So yeah, not gonna take away all of those, but I still feel he had the car and he definitely has the skill, but he just went off and he wasn't up there this weekend. He was just not in his element. So yeah, those are my two classifications. You, Rusty?
I mean, I think like the public votes called for Alan Vandermeer after Grosjean, the medical
Oh,
car driver, who
oh,
deserves all the plaudits he's getting, absolutely. But on track, everyone in an F1 car, I think like we've talked about this earlier, like I think Sainz, hands down, he did not have a good quali, but the aggression he went about on those softs, his first stint was brilliant. I think he did 20 odd laps or something close to that on those softs. So that aggression and the amount of overtakes he got done during that, and the way he went about with those overtakes were all brilliant, and that's why I think Science is my driver of the day. And yeah, 21 laps as you can see over there, which is like fabulous. My not so driver of the day, yeah, I think I would agree. Bottas, his start was terrible. He started P2 but dropped all the way down to P6. But fortunately, he got back to P4, which is a great place to start at Bahrain because you're not punching through the air. But then again, he once again did not have the best of starts, and then that puncher was unlucky. And I just think like anyone in a Mercedes, you expect more, and that's why Bottas is not my driver of the day. But I think like pretty much across the grid, a lot of these drivers had one of their best races this season, so it's hard to tell
please do
who's
note.
not my driver of the day.
Yeah, just putting it out there. Russell also had a really good race. He finished P12, to my best knowledge. So,
Yeah,
yeah, Black Sheep. Moving on to you.
Okay, so I've got two tied for driver of the day. I think Carlos Sainz certainly, but I think we've been forgetting Lando Norris. He started ninth and finished fourth. Um, so equally good job. I think he was sort of not featured that much in the race. Um, but yeah, I think he had a great race too. Both the McLaren guys did, certainly. Before I move ahead to not the driver of the day, one thing I want to mention, Harry, with your choice of Pierre Gasly, he started eighth and finished sixth. He had two retirements ahead of him. So technically, he didn't really make up any positions. And he got lucky with the last three laps being under safety car because Sainz was closing that gap on him pretty much at the rate of a second a lap, or close to 7, 8 tenths a lap. He certainly would have been overtaken by the end of the race.
Yeah, I
So I think
think
a
you.
little bit too much credit for him there.
Yeah, sorry. I think I missed that. But yeah, I think you meant Ricardo closing up to him really fast, not
Oh,
Sainz.
sorry, my bad. Yes, Ricardo.
Yes, okay,
Uh,
fine. But
my bad.
the reason I just gave him that was because of I mean he just had one pit stop during race and he's taken those tires. He just kept his head down and did that, stayed on that strategy and took the tires
I
to the
agree.
end. That's
I
why
agree.
I felt he was
But then I
really good.
think from the team's point of view, they don't really have a choice because if they had pitted him, they would have been out of points. The only, so it was basically just roll the dice and let's just hope for the best sort of a scenario with him. Because if they pit him, they know they're certainly out of points. The only way for them to get any amount of points is if they just hope that something happens that he stays within the points, and that's what happened. And it worked out for him in hindsight. Um, but I'm pretty sure at the start of the race, they would have certainly hoped for a two-stop, or that's what they would have prepared for. Um, anyway, not my driver of the day. I think for me is Esteban Ocon. I think the Renault had a lot of good pace. It should have certainly been, if not the third, the fourth best car on the grid after Racing Point. And especially with both the Racing Points retiring, that third place should have been theirs. The position that McLaren ended up in, completely snatched away from Renault. I don't know what Ocon was doing on the older tires in the first stint. I don't know what the team was doing. It was just a bad call after a bad call. Both the drivers then fighting each other. Um, I'm not giving that to Ricardo because I think in both those occasions he had the pace, and he was the quicker driver. I think
Yeah,
both the drivers should have played the team game more than racing each other. It just cost the team.
yeah, you're right. I think I have to agree with you on that. That insight was quite useful. Anyway, so yeah, that's the driver of the day and not so or not the driver of the day for each of us. Do we have anything else we have not touched upon about this weekend?
I think we've covered most of it from a race that was rather uneventful. We've managed to salvage bits out of it. I'm not sure how interesting it's been for people who've listened to it, but I think we've done the job.
Yep.
Anything else to cover, guys?
Nothing from my side. Rusty, do you have anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think we've covered pretty much everything that happened on Sunday.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you guys. Thank you to me too for turning up, and thank you to people who have bothered to tune in. We look forward to the next race, despite how dismal the result may be. But we still look forward to it. At least I do. We'll come back with another edition of Paddock Piss, hopefully next week. Thank you once again. Thanks to both of you, and see you later.
Good night. See you guys.
Bye bye.